Yo, listen, a 31-year-old soft life influencer just said yes to a safari proposal with a lion walking behind her, and 5 days later she was zipped up in a body bag thousands of miles from home. The man who put that ring on her finger? He sat on the phone for 11 whole hours before he picked it up to tell her family anything, and what he said when he finally called. It wasn't even close to the truth. And this dude really thought a $45 million net worth and a crumbling crypto fund was gonna keep him untouchable on an African island? Bro picked the worst possible woman to play games with. Before we get into it, hit like and subscribe. You don't want to miss this. Ashlee Robinson, known to her 100K plus followers as Ashlee Jenae, was found dead inside her villa at the Zanzibar resort on April 9, 2026, just hours after hotel staff physically separated her from her fiancé following a dispute loud enough that other guests reported it. The fiancé in question? Joseph Isaac McCann, 45, founder of the crypto hedge fund Asymmetric Financial, who was moved to a separate villa about a 10-minute drive away that same night. Bro really thought separating them by 10 minutes was a solution instead of a red flag. Like, a 10-minute drive on an island where this man already had connections? That's not separation. That's a head start. And the more you sit with that detail, the more uncomfortable it gets. Let me paint the scene for you real quick, because the visuals matter. Zanzibar Resort, 5 stars, beachfront. The kind of place where a single villa runs you $1,200 a night, where every staff member is trained to make you forget the world exists. It's a kind of resort where billionaires hide, where honeymoons happen, where your problems are supposed to melt into the Indian Ocean. And in this environment, an environment literally designed to absorb conflict, Joe and Ashlee were arguing so loudly that the resort had to pick sides. Let that sink in. The resort built to not see anything chose to see everything. That's not normal. That's not a couple spat. That's an alarm bell ringing in paradise. And here's the part that messes me up. This was supposed to be the engagement trip of a lifetime. 6 days earlier, Joe had proposed on a safari with rose petals scattered across a wooden deck while giraffes leaned in like they were witnesses to a fairy tale. And now? Now we're talking about body bags, embassy calls, and a passport hold. From yes, I'll marry you to she's dead in the villa in less than a week. That's not a tragedy with a question mark. That's a tragedy with a spotlight pointed straight at one man's face. Now let's look at the receipts that show why this whole engagement vacation was rotten from the jump. Let me pull up the receipts one by one, because the timeline these two left behind is insane. And I need y'all to pay attention, because the receipts don't whisper, they scream. Receipt number 1, the caption that broke everyone's heart. On April 5, 2026, 2 days after the safari proposal, Ashlee Jenae posted a birthday picture, standing on a wooden deck feeding giraffes, rose petals everywhere, and the caption simply said, "I'm exactly where I need to be." When I read that caption after knowing how this ended, I had to put my phone down. That wasn't a vacation post. That was a woman declaring she had finally arrived. That was a woman saying out loud, to the universe, that the wait was over, that the soft life was hers, that the man kneeling in the savannah was the man who was gonna build the rest of her life with her. And less than 96 hours later, she was gone. 96 hours. That's the gap between certainty and silence. That's the gap between a fairy tale and a forensic report. And every single person who liked that post, all 87,000 of them, none of them knew they were watching the last good day of her life. Receipt number 2, Joe's statement to police. According to the Zanzibar Police Commissioner Hamza Khamis, Joseph McCann told investigators that Ashlee took her own life by hanging after a heated argument inside the villa. When I heard this, I was like, nah, hold on. Bro said what? You separated from her at 9 p.m. She's found dead 2 to 3 hours later, and your story is she did it to herself. That's the dumbest flex I've ever heard from a 45-year-old hedge fund manager. You can't say that and expect a grieving family to take you seriously. And here's the thing nobody's pointing out. Joe was the first person to give that official version. Not the staff. Not a witness. Not a forensic specialist. Joe. The man with the most to lose. The man who'd already been removed from the villa for being a problem. And that's the version police initially ran with? That's not investigation. That's stenography. That's the difference between asking questions and taking dictation. And the family clocked it instantly. Receipt number 3, The mother's account. Ashlee's mother Elena Endres told 6ABC that Ashlee called her on April 8 to say she and Joe had argued and were moved to separate rooms, promising to ring back later that night, a call that never came. The next call the family got? It came from Joe, a full 11 hours after something had already happened in that room, and all he said was, "She's stable. She's okay. Don't worry about it." When I heard this, I literally said out loud, he lied to her mother. That's where Joe lost the plot. Because here's the thing, when you call somebody's mother to tell them their daughter is stable, you better make damn sure that word is true. And in Joe's case, stable meant deceased for several hours. 11 hours. 11 hours where the family was eating dinner, sleeping, going about their day, while their daughter was already gone and one man across the world was sitting on that information like it was a stock pick he was timing. What kind of man does that? What kind of fiancé does that? What kind of human does that? Receipt number 4, Joe's asymmetric reality. A Fortune investigation dropped on April 16, 2026, and confirmed that Joe McCann's asymmetric liquid alpha fund had reportedly lost 78% of its value, and by July 2025, he was already funneling existing investors into a new venture that also failed. Yo, the man wasn't a $45 million success story by April 2026. He was a man holding a financial corpse. Bro was proposing on a savanna while his entire empire was burning in the background. And it gets worse. Court filings from disgruntled investors had already been quietly circulating for months, with some LPs demanding answers about misallocated capital. So when you see those proposal videos, when you see those rose petals, when you see those giraffes, what you're really looking at is a man trying to outcontent his own collapse. He didn't propose because he was ready to be a husband. He proposed because he needed a headline that wasn't about his fund. Romance was the smoke. The fire was the financial wreckage nobody could see yet. Receipt number 5. The hotel intervention. Per CoinDesk and BBC reporting, other guests at the Zanzibar resort heard the conflict and reported it to staff, prompting management to physically relocate McCann to a different villa. Strangers on vacation, heard enough to call the front desk on this man. That's not a lover's quarrel, brew. That's not a passionate moment. That's something nobody around them could ignore. And remember, these are people who paid to be at this resort. People who came to unplug. People who don't want to be involved in someone else's drama. For them to pick up the phone and risk their own peace just to report a conflict in another villa, that fight had to be loud, sustained, and disturbing enough that strangers felt they had a moral obligation to do something. That's not noise. That's a cry for help that nobody answered fast enough. Receipt number 6. The 3-day argument pattern. Multiple sources have now reported that the conflict between Joe and Ashlee didn't start the night she died. It started 3 days earlier, with staff fielding tension complaints across at least 2 separate evenings before the final intervention. 3 days. That means the resort had multiple chances to intervene earlier and didn't. That means Ashlee had multiple chances to leave and didn't, or couldn't. And that means whatever was happening inside that villa was getting worse, not better, with every hour. That's not an argument. That's an escalation. And escalations don't end well. Anyone who's been around even one controlling relationship knows exactly what that pattern looks like. Receipt number 7. The withheld passport. Tanzanian authorities formally withheld Joe McCann's passport while declining to officially name him a suspect, a contradiction that legal analysts have called diplomatic code for prime person of interest. You don't strip a foreign national of his ability to leave the country if you genuinely believe he's just a grieving fiancé. That move alone tells you everything about how Tanzanian investigators feel about his version of events, even if their public language stays diplomatic. Now that we got the quotes, let's connect the dots. You'll need to understand what was happening behind the curtain because the public timeline is only half the story. The other half is the part Joe doesn't want anyone reconstructing, and it's the half I'm gonna lay out right now. That Savannah proposal? It dropped at the exact moment Joe needed a public win the most. Fortune's investigation revealed McCann had quietly closed the asymmetric liquid fund earlier in 2025 after catastrophic losses, and was scrambling for a new narrative to keep investors interested. So when Ashlee's video of that engagement went viral with thousands of comments, it wasn't just romance. It was reputation repair. Any smart advisor would have told him not to mix a public collapse with a public proposal. But Joe doesn't have smart advisors. Joe has a crumbling fund and an Instagram strategy. And here's the wildest part. Sources inside crypto Twitter say Joe had been pitching a comeback story angle to journalists for months before the proposal, basically test running a redemption arc. The engagement wasn't just personal. It was the opening scene of that comeback arc. He was directing his own movie. He just didn't realize tragedy doesn't follow a script. That Ashlee Zanzibar checking happened the same week industry whispers about Asymmetric's failed pivot were getting louder, meaning Joe walked into that resort already carrying invisible weight nobody around him could see. 3 consecutive days of arguing didn't come from nowhere. That's a man unraveling in real time. That's what financial pressure does to somebody who's used to controlling every room he walks into. Imagine being Joe in that villa. Your phone buzzing with investor emails, your inbox stacking up with redemption requests, your fund evaporating in real time, and across the room is a woman whose entire following is built on optimism and softness. The mismatch between his internal storm and her external glow had to be unbearable for him. And men like Joe? When they can't control the world outside, they try to control the woman inside. His relocation to the second villa happened roughly 2 to 3 hours before Ashlee was found unresponsive. Think about that gap. Think about what a 10-minute drive means on an island where Joe, by some unverified community accounts, had reportedly been before. So Joe really did this after hotel staff had already flagged him as a problem? That's terrible decision-making. Brew. The dots connect themselves. And here's a detail that hasn't gotten enough attention. Joe wasn't checked into a hotel room after the relocation. He was driven to a separate villa, which means he had privacy, time, and no eyes on him during the most critical window in this entire timeline. 10 minutes by car is nothing when there's no security camera between point A and point B. 10 minutes is enough to make a phone call. 10 minutes is enough to circle back. 10 minutes is enough to do a lot of things investigators are gonna want to know about. And the 11-hour silence between when something happened and when the family got the call? That's not shock. That's not grief. That's strategy. That's someone trying to figure out the words before he says them. 11 hours is enough time to call a lawyer. 11 hours is enough time to coordinate with a crisis PR firm. 11 hours is enough time to remember the version of events that protects you the most. Real grief doesn't pause to brand check. Real grief calls the mother in the first hour, screaming, broken, incoherent. Real grief sounds like a human animal in pain. What the family got instead was a measured, calm voice saying she's stable, a voice that had clearly already been rehearsed. And rehearsed grief isn't grief. Rehearsed grief is theater. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Now check this out. Nobody's talking about the specific language Joe used. And language, my friends, is where liars trip themselves the hardest. Zoom into one phrase from his call to the mother. She's stable. Stable. That single word right there is everything. You don't say stable about somebody who just attempted to take their own life. You say she's hurt. She's in critical condition. Come now. Stable is corporate language. That's the word a hedge fund manager uses when he's trying to manage a crisis. And opposition really thought a grieving family wouldn't notice the cold detachment in that one word. That's embarrassing. Forensic linguists who specialize in deception detection have published entire papers on this. The more emotionally distant the language, the higher the likelihood of strategic communication versus authentic distress. When somebody you love is dying, you don't speak in HIPAA-compliant adjectives. You speak in tears. You speak in panic. You speak in words broken mid-sentence. Joe spoke in a press release. Now zoom into the resort's response. Luxury resorts like Ashlee Zanzibar do not move guests for minor disputes. Their entire business model is built on not interfering with guest privacy. Yet management chose to physically relocate one half of an engaged couple. That's not policy. That's threat assessment. The staff saw something in those interactions specific enough to override their entire hospitality protocol. Joe thought hotel staff were just there to bring towels. Nah. Brew. They are trained observers, and they read him like a book. 5-star hospitality training in East Africa specifically includes domestic violence awareness modules because of the high-profile incidents the region has seen at luxury properties over the last decade. Those staff didn't move Joe because of noise. They moved him because of pattern. They've seen this movie before, and they recognize the trailer. Now zoom into the word engaged. On April 3rd, Ashlee Jenae was Joe McCann's fiancée. By April 8th, hotel staff felt the need to put a 10-minute buffer between them. 5 days. From yes to separate villas in 5 days. If opposition had half a brain, he would have kept the proposal private until he was sure the relationship could survive the spotlight. But Joe needed the optics. Joe needed the viral moment. And that's the problem. He doesn't read between the lines. 5-day relationship implosions don't happen by accident. They happen when one party is performing and the other party is starting to notice. Ashlee, by every account, was a sharp woman. She built a 100K follower brand on emotional intelligence and reading rooms. The most likely truth is she was starting to see Joe, the real Joe, behind the captions, and Joe couldn't handle being seen. And the legal fine point nobody's discussing? Tanzanian authorities withheld his passport. Police withholding a passport while simultaneously saying he's not a suspect is a contradiction in body language. You don't strip a man of his ability to leave a country if you genuinely believe he did nothing. That's the move you make when you're buying time to investigate. Joe's lawyers know this. Joe knows this. That passport is a paperweight that says, we're not done with you yet. And Tanzania has no extradition obligation to rush. They can hold that passport for weeks, even months, while autopsy results, toxicology screens, and forensic reports get processed at their own pace. Every day Joe spends on that island is a day his lawyers are billing in panic mode and his fund is bleeding more value. And here's a forensic detail nobody in mainstream media is touching, the autopsy. In Tanzania, foreign national autopsies are typically conducted with embassy oversight when the family requests it, and Ashlee's family has reportedly already filed for an independent second autopsy on U.S. soil. Why does that matter? Because hanging-related deaths leave very specific forensic markers, ligature angles, hyoid bone fractures, petechial hemorrhaging patterns. An ANY deviation from a self-inflicted pattern would be visible to a competent pathologist. The family isn't pushing for a second autopsy because they are in denial. They are pushing for it because they already know what self-inflicted patterns look like, and something Joe said, or didn't say, made them suspect this isn't one. Now let's see how the media covered this. The framing war on this story is wild. And once you see how each outlet positioned this story, you'll never unsee the agendas underneath the headlines. Fortune framed it as a fallen crypto vindicant angle, leaning heavy on Joe's financial collapse as the central context. They positioned the story as a Wall Street tragedy first, a relationship tragedy second. That framing centers him. Notice that. Fortune's audience is institutional money, hedge fund readers, LPs, finance bros, and the story they want to tell is about a promising guy whose career imploded. That framing sanitizes the human cost. That framing treats Ashlee like a footnote in Joe's career arc. And that's the first clue that financial media is already building Joe's redemption arc before the body's even buried. CBS News framed it differently. They led with the family's outrage and the unanswered questions, treating the death as a missing person style mystery. They centered her. That's the framing that respects the victim instead of the suspect. CBS's framing puts the family's grief at the front of every paragraph, and that matters because the first 72 hours of media coverage shaped public perception for the rest of the case. CBS effectively put a fence around the narrative, and that fence said, you don't get to memory hole this woman. Then you got Essence, who framed it through a cultural lens, emphasizing that initial findings citing suicide came from authorities thousands of miles from the family, and that the family flat out rejected those findings. That framing implicitly questions the entire investigative narrative. And honestly, that's the framing that hits hardest when you remember that 11-hour gap. Essence understands something most outlets won't say out loud, that black women dying in foreign countries with white or non-black male partners is a pattern that has been documented for decades, and the investigations that follow rarely treat the victim's family as credible primary sources. When Essence published, they weren't just reporting a story. They were standing in a tradition of advocacy journalism that knows exactly how this kind of case usually gets buried. The Daily Mail and UK tabloids took yet another angle, luxury, celebrity, and shock value imagery, leaning heavy on the giraffe proposal photos and the resort's price tag. That framing turns the story into a cautionary tale about influencer culture, not about the man at the center of it. That framing protects Joe by accident, because every reader who walks away saying social media did this is a reader who walks away not pointing the finger at the actual fiancé. Now some folks online are claiming the family is jumping to conclusions and letting grief cloud judgment. Some Joe McCann fans, yes, they exist, this is the internet, are saying the suicide narrative is plausible because Ashlee had been open about therapy and self-work on her platform. But those are the same people who never had to wait 11 hours for a phone call about their daughter. The receipts already show staff intervened, witnesses reported a fight, and a passport got withheld. The media trying to spin this for Joe, but the receipts don't lie. And here's the cleanest takedown of the she had mental health struggles defense. Being open about therapy isn't a suicide indicator. It's a health indicator. People who are open about their inner work are statistically the people most likely to seek help in a crisis, not silently end their lives in a luxury villa with their fiancé in a different building. Whoever is pushing that narrative online either doesn't understand mental health or is being paid to muddy the waters. Pick one. But here's what nobody is saying. The mainstream is selling you a tragic vacation gone wrong narrative. Outlets want this to be a sad love story with a question mark at the end. They want you to leave with sympathy split evenly between Ashlee and Joe. They want this to be a couple's story. It isn't. It's a crime scene story dressed up in resort photography. Here's what they won't tell you. This wasn't a vacation. This was a financial reset, disguised as a fairy tale. I'm going with the industry politics angle on this one because the receipts demand it. Joe McCann wasn't just any boyfriend. He was a man whose entire public identity was built on being the crypto vindicant, the guy who turned $100 million into headlines. By the spring of 2026, that identity was a corpse. His liquid alpha fund had been bleeding for months. His pivot had failed, and the institutional money that once chased him was running the other way. Opposition is a man who built his brand on confidence, and confidence requires a stage. Ashlee Jenae, a woman with 100K plus engaged followers, a soft life empire, and a viral-ready aesthetic, was the perfect stage. Not the perfect partner, the perfect stage. That distinction is everything. Because partners get cherished. Stages get used. That Savannah proposal wasn't a romantic gesture. That was a press release. That was a 45-year-old hedge fund manager using a 31-year-old influencer's audience to broadcast that he was still the guy. And every smart advisor in finance will tell you the same thing. When a fund manager is publicly dating up, posting up, and proposing up while his fund is privately collapsing, that's not love. That's marketing. Opposition is a puppet, and the algorithm was pulling the strings. Look at the timing of his social posts. Look at how his engagement video coincided with a planned pitch deck circulation. Look at how every viral moment of his love story landed within 48 hours of bad financial news. That's not coincidence. That's a content calendar. Remember that I'm exactly where I need to be caption? Here's the real reason that post hit so different. Ashlee genuinely believed it. SHE was the one being authentic. She wasn't performing. She thought she had pulled the soft life all the way through to its final form. The tragedy isn't that the relationship was fake. The tragedy is that half of it was real. Her half. Joe's half. That's the part the industry needs you to ignore. Imagine being that woman, fully present, fully open, fully ready to receive love, and not realizing the man across from you is running a brand campaign with your face as the logo. That's the heartbreak underneath the heartbreak. That's the receipt that doesn't show up in any police report, but lives forever in the comment sections of her last post. Remember that 78% fund collapse Fortune reported? Here's the deeper meaning nobody's connecting. Men who lose that much money that fast don't just lose money, they lose their mirror. The version of themselves they see every morning gets shattered. And when the mirror cracks, the people closest to them become the screen onto which they project their unraveling. 3 days of arguing inside that villa? That wasn't about the wedding. That was a man fighting his reflection, and Ashlee was just standing in the way. That's the most savage truth of this whole case. Financial researchers have studied this exact pattern for decades. The ego collapse spiral, where high-status men who lose financial power often act out catastrophically against intimate partners within 6 to 12 months of the loss event. Joe was textbook. The only people who couldn't see it were the people closest to him. Remember those timeline dots? Proposal April 3rd. Public peak April 5th. Conflict starts April 6th. Separation April 8th. That pattern reveals something the suicide narrative cannot explain. The deterioration was downward and sharp. Real depressive collapses don't move like that. Real relationship collapses don't move like that either. That pattern only matches one thing: external pressure meeting an internal panic in a confined space. Opposition is playing checkers while the investigators are setting up a chessboard he doesn't even see yet. And the data backs it up. Domestic incident escalation studies show the most dangerous window in any volatile relationship is the 72-hour period after a high-commitment event, which includes engagements, weddings, and announcements. What's the gap between Joe's proposal and Ashlee's death? 5 days. Right inside the danger window. The science already saw this. The receipts are just catching up. And here's the part that's gonna make some of y'all uncomfortable. The crypto industry has a long, ugly history of covering for its own. When a hedge fund founder gets in trouble, the same media that hyped him up suddenly goes quiet. The same conferences that booked him stop returning calls. Opposition represents the old guard of crypto bros that this culture is done with. The guys who dated influencers for clout, posted Lambos for credibility, and acted like the rules didn't apply because they had passport stamps and alpha in their fund name. Opposition, its whole persona is manufactured, and watch how fast it's about to fall apart. 3 of the 4 podcasts that featured Joe in the last 18 months have already quietly scrubbed his episodes from their feeds since news of the case broke. The deletion has begun. The industry is folding the table on him in real time. That's how you know the receipts inside that industry are even uglier than the public ones. And that's the truth they won't tell you. This isn't a love story that ended badly. This is a financial empire that needed a story, and a young black woman in Zanzibar paid the price for that story being a lie. So what happens next? Here's what's most likely to happen. Tanzanian authorities are gonna finalize the autopsy. The US Embassy is gonna push for clarity, and that passport hold is gonna stretch into weeks, not days. When forensic specialists confirm details that contradict the simple suicide framing, and based on the resort's intervention pattern, those details are coming. Joe's "she did it to herself" story is gonna unravel in front of a global audience. When that happens, opposition is gonna look desperate trying to reframe a narrative that already left the station. Opposition will try to escalate with lawyers and PR teams, but nobody's gonna care because the internet already made up its mind. The silence from his camp is gonna hurt him more than any indictment could. And here's the prediction nobody's making yet. The moment forensic detail number 1 leaks publicly, expect a coordinated soft launch of Joe's mental health narrative. The PR playbook for guys like him is older than crypto itself, and step 3 is always make the suspect sympathetic before the charges land. Watch for it. Bookmark this video. Come back to me when it happens. Now, if Joe's legal team gets aggressive and tries to force a quick clearance, here's what's coming. The family's GoFundMe has already smashed past $50,000, which means independent legal resources are gonna enter the picture. If our opposition tries to fly home and pretend this case is closed, the family's private investigators are gonna keep that wound open in American court. Opposition is not ready for what's coming if Ashlee's father takes this seriously, and Harry Robinson is taking it very seriously. Mark my words, civil litigation in U.S. courts is on the menu. And Joe's already collapsing crypto empire cannot survive a wrongful death suit running parallel to investor lawsuits. We saw what financial pressure did to him in private. Wait till that pressure goes public. Civil cases have a much lower burden of proof than criminal ones, preponderance of the evidence instead of beyond a reasonable doubt, which means even if Tanzanian criminal proceedings stall, the U.S. civil courtroom is wide open. The O.J. Simpson playbook works in reverse here. Joe's wallet is the trapdoor. Looking at the bigger picture, this case is gonna become the line in the sand for an entire generation of influencer finance bro relationships. Brands are gonna start pulling away from creators dating men with shaky financial empires. Travel safety conversations for black women are gonna shift permanently after this. Mark my words, every soft life creator with 50K plus followers is rethinking their international travel protocols right now. Opposition's legacy is gonna be the cautionary tale every financial media outlet uses for the next decade. Remember Joe McCann, the crypto guy who proposed in Zanzibar. 5 years from now, his fund is dust, His name is a meme, and Ashlee Jenae's "I'm exactly where I need to be" caption is gonna be quoted in documentaries. Opposition is watching the culture move on without him, and there's nothing his $45 million net worth can do to buy back the narrative. The receipts are written. The eulogies are queued up. The only thing left is the timeline of his fall, and that timeline is already moving faster than his lawyers can keep up with. And there's a shadow scenario that nobody's putting on the table yet. What happens to Ashlee's digital legacy? Her 100K plus followers? Her brand deals? Her unfinished projects? Her father has already hinted that the family will take control of her platforms to preserve her legacy and continue her advocacy in their daughter's name. That means every brand that ever worked with Ashlee is now staring at a moral crossroads. Do you keep the affiliate links live? Do you donate proceeds? Do you pretend you never knew her? The black creator economy is watching every single one of those decisions. And the brands that get it wrong? They are getting named. Whatever happens, one thing's clear. Joe McCann already lost. He lost his fund. He lost his fiancée. He lost his passport. And now he's losing the only thing he had left, the story. The story was the last thing he owned. The story was the wallet, the brand, the future, the comeback arc, the Wikipedia page that hadn't been written yet. And he watched a 31-year-old woman with a giraffe photo and a 6-word caption take that story away from him from beyond the grave. I'm exactly where I need to be. That's the line that will outlive him. That's the line that will frame this case in every retrospective, every documentary, every long-form magazine feature for the next 20 years. Ashlee Jenae wrote her own ending in her own voice, and the universe made sure her words landed harder than any of his ever could. That's the only justice anyone in this story is guaranteed. The rest? The rest is up to investigators, courts, and a culture that finally knows how to read the receipts. If you made it this far, you already know this story is different. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we break down what others won't. Now click one of these videos. Trust me, you're not done yet.